Hollywood sells perfection, red carpets, golden statues, faces that never age. But behind the glamour lies a different script, one written in whispers, betrayals, and silent erasures. The same studios that crown their stars as legends can erase them overnight, rewriting history with the stroke of a pen and a well-timed scandal. These are not forgotten actors, they're the ones Hollywood wants you to forget. Men and women who broke its rules, challenged its authority, or simply said too much. Their careers didn't end with bad movies, but with quiet phone calls and vanishing contracts. Fame didn't fade, it was taken. What does it really take to be blacklisted? A mistake? A secret? Or simply the courage to stand alone? Tonight, we uncover the 20 blacklisted stars icons once adored, now exiled from the empire they helped build. Their stories will change how you see Hollywood forever. 20. Katherine Heigl. There was a time when Katherine Heigl could do no wrong. Her name alone could sell a movie. Her smile could melt the toughest critics, and her performances in Grey's Anatomy and Knocked Up made her one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. She was polished yet human, the kind of actress who seemed born for the camera, carrying both sweetness and fire in the same glance. But confidence has a price in an industry built on compliance. As her fame soared, Heigl began to speak about unfair working hours, disrespect on set, and the lack of authenticity in scripts. What she called honesty, Hollywood called arrogance. When she famously withdrew her Emmy nomination, saying her material didn't deserve it, the move was seen not as integrity but insult. In a town where egos rule, humility isn't optional, it's required. The reaction was swift and silent. Directors stopped calling, producers lost interest, and her name started to vanish from headlines. No scandal, no crime, just a quiet retreat, engineered by an industry that punishes those who stop smiling. Her career, once unstoppable, faded into a whisper of, "What happened?" Whispers only heard in passing conversations among casting agents. In the years that followed, Heigl retreated to quieter projects, television roles, independent films, and life far from the red carpets that once defined her. She found happiness in family, a kind of peace that fame had never offered. But her absence left a strange echo, proof that Hollywood doesn't need to destroy you publicly, it just needs to stop believing in you. Katherine Heigl's story isn't one of scandal or sin, it's one of silence. She became a reminder that in Hollywood, the worst offense isn't failure or controversy. It's daring to say, you deserve better. 19. Megan Fox. Megan Fox didn't just arrive in Hollywood, she detonated into it. With Transformers, she became the face of a generation, bold, impossibly beautiful, and untamed. She had the rare ability to make the screen feel alive, to make audiences lean forward without saying a word. In an era obsessed with perfection, Megan was real confident, sharp-tongued, and unfiltered. But the same fire that built her fame would soon burn her. During the height of her success, she began speaking openly about the sexism and exploitation she endured on set. Her comparison of a powerful director to a dictator made headlines, and what should have been a conversation about abuse turned into a career-ending scandal. Hollywood doesn't forgive truth when it threatens the illusion. Overnight, she was branded ungrateful, difficult, and dangerous. Within months, the dream ended. She was replaced, her image erased from promotional tours, and her name quietly moved to the bottom of casting lists. Tabloids circled like vultures, inventing stories to justify her fall. The same photographers who once begged for her attention now followed her downfall for clicks. She had become a spectacle, the rise and ruin of beauty under the camera's cold eye. Years later, Megan resurfaced, not as the ingenue Hollywood wanted, but as the woman she had become. She embraced motherhood, took indie roles, and used her platform to call out the very system that exiled her. Her interviews grew calmer, wiser, as if she'd learned the hardest lesson of fame. Survival requires reinvention. Megan Fox's name is no longer shorthand for scandal, it's a warning. Her exile exposed a truth. Hollywood prefers to hide that the industry will destroy its own icons before admitting it mistreated them. 18. Armie Hammer. Armie Hammer once looked like the blueprint of a movie star, tall, refined, and impossibly perfect. With roles in The Social Network and Call Me by Your Name, he carried the kind of effortless charm that Hollywood hadn't seen in decades. He was the gentleman rebel, the modern prince, the kind of actor who could make even silence magnetic. Then, in a matter of days, that image was obliterated. Private messages leaked online, shocking, grotesque, and impossible to ignore. Allegations of abuse and manipulation followed, each one heavier than the last. What began as gossip became a cultural event. The public didn't wait for evidence. The court of social media had already delivered its sentence, and Hollywood, terrified of guilt by association, fled. He lost everything almost overnight. Studios canceled films, agencies severed contracts, and productions scrubbed his name from their campaigns. No one spoke his name in meetings anymore, not even in whispers. He wasn't blacklisted officially, but the silence was absolute, and that's far more permanent. In an industry obsessed with appearances, redemption is only for the marketable. Away from the spotlight, Hammer vanished. Reports surfaced of him working in the Cayman Islands, living quietly, stripped of the luxury he once embodied. A few interviews followed, defensive, broken, and searching, but they came too late. The myth of Armie Hammer had been dismantled. What remained was just a man, no longer the fantasy Hollywood once sold. Armie Hammer's fall is more than scandal. It's a reflection of the world that made him. Hollywood creates idols, then devours them to feed its own morality. His story is the warning hidden behind every glossy premiere that fame isn't earned or lost, it's granted, and it can vanish the moment you stop being profitable. 17. Amber Heard. Amber Heard was the kind of star Hollywood loves to invent, striking, articulate, and perfectly built for the lens. With Aquaman and The Rum Diary, she looked like the next great leading lady, destined to dominate billboards and award seasons alike. Her beauty wasn't fragile. It carried edge and intent, a quiet promise that she was more than just another face in a blockbuster. Then that promise turned into a spectacle. Her marriage to Johnny Depp, once the stuff of tabloid fantasy, spiraled into one of the most public implosions in entertainment history. Accusations, counter-accusations, and years of courtroom drama transformed her life into a trial watched by millions. Each frame of the televised hearings became a meme, each tear a headline. The public didn't see people, they saw sides. Amber wasn't just an actress anymore. She was a symbol in a war between belief and hatred. Hollywood reacted with surgical precision. Studios distanced themselves, cutting her from projects or shrinking her roles. Brands erased her name from campaigns, and silence replaced endorsement. It wasn't a ban, it was something colder, a quiet professional disappearance. When the dust settled, her career was in ruins, not because of talent, but because her name now carried risk. She fled the noise. Moving to Spain, she began a new life far from the vultures of Los Angeles. There, she rebuilt quietly, choosing independent European films over American chaos. In interviews, her tone shifted, calm, detached, as if she'd accepted that the world no longer wanted her version of the story. For the first time, her fame didn't define her. Her absence did. Amber Heard's fall reveals something deeper about fame itself. Hollywood pretends to be moral, but what it truly fears is controversy that can't be controlled. She became both the villain and the victim, proof that in the age of outrage, truth is irrelevant when the mob has already made up its mind. 16. Brendan Fraser. Brendan Fraser once represented everything audiences adored about the movie's adventure, heart, and humility. With The Mummy and George of the Jungle, he became the face of family-friendly heroism, a man whose warmth made even the most outrageous plots believable. He was the everyman with the soul of a movie star, approachable, funny, and endlessly kind. Hollywood had found its perfect leading man. Then, one day, he was gone. The studios stopped calling, the scripts stopped arriving, and his name quietly vanished from marquees. For years, fans asked the same question: what happened to Brendan Fraser? The truth was more painful than anyone guessed. He revealed he had been sexually assaulted by a powerful industry executive, and when he spoke up, Hollywood's doors shut on him. At the same time, his body broke down from years of stunts, and depression crept in. His career didn't end in scandal, it ended in silence. For over a decade, Brendan lived in the shadows of an industry that pretended not to remember him. He raised his children, battled pain and isolation, and watched younger stars fill the space he once owned. To the world, he was a ghost of the 90s. To himself, he was just trying to survive. Yet even in exile, he never lost the gentleness that defined him. Then came The Whale. The film wasn't just a comeback, it was a resurrection. His performance, raw and heartbreaking, reminded everyone of the humanity he had always carried. When he wept on stage accepting his Oscar, it felt like the world was apologizing. For one night, the forgotten man was remembered again. Brendan Fraser's story isn't about fame lost, it's about dignity reclaimed. His silence exposed Hollywood's cruelty, and his return showed the power of resilience. In a town that worships perfection, he became something far rarer, a hero who finally got to be human. 15. Russell Brand. Russell Brand wasn't just a comedian, he was a force of chaos wrapped in charm and vocabulary. When he exploded onto the scene with Forgetting Sarah Marshall and Get Him to the Greek, he seemed to bend reality itself. Quick, eccentric, and irresistibly unpredictable, he was the rare entertainer who made intellect look dangerous and charisma feel anarchic. Hollywood adored him because he was wild, but only while he stayed funny. That affection didn't last. As Brand's fame grew, so did his outspokenness. He mocked the media, challenged the government, and ridiculed the hypocrisy of celebrity culture, all while cultivating a following that saw him as part philosopher, part jester. Then came the allegations: sexual assault, manipulation, and abuse stories that surfaced years after his stardom had peaked. Suddenly, the rebel Hollywood once invited to its parties became the man it refused to acknowledge. Studios and networks reacted instantly. Old shows were removed from streaming platforms, scheduled appearances were canceled, and brand partnerships evaporated. The man once celebrated for speaking freely was now accused of speaking too much. In the age of cancel culture, nuance is irrelevant, guilt is a headline, and headlines are enough. But Russell Brand didn't fade quietly. He reinvented himself online, transforming his exile into independence. On his YouTube channel and podcasts, he built a new empire, one fueled by followers who saw him as a truth-teller rather than a criminal. He spoke about politics, spirituality, and redemption, turning scandal into a sermon. Whether he was sincere or strategic, the world still listened. Russell Brand's story is the portrait of modern exile, a man too loud for an industry that thrives on silence. He may have lost Hollywood, but he gained something it could never offer: complete control of his own voice. His name now sits at the crossroads of genius and disgrace, the exact place, perhaps, where he always intended to be. 14. Rose McGowan. Rose McGowan was never built to be quiet. From Scream to Charmed, she radiated a kind of defiance that didn't fit the Hollywood mold. Her gaze, her tone, her very presence carried the electricity of someone who refused to be controlled. She wasn't just acting, she was challenging the script written for women in the industry, one that demanded beauty, submission, and silence. For years, she played along just enough to survive. Until she didn't. When she broke her silence about Harvey Weinstein, Hollywood's facade cracked. Her accusations helped ignite the Me Too movement, exposing decades of abuse and complicity within the system. But for McGowan, truth came at a brutal cost. The same industry that had profited from her image now treated her like a contagion. Invitations vanished, phone calls stopped, and her name became synonymous with controversy. She was no longer a star, she was a problem. The media painted her as unstable, bitter, and obsessive. Studio executives dismissed her activism as hysteria, while journalists dissected her every word, searching for ways to discredit the woman who dared to confront the machine. It wasn't just punishment, it was an erasure, a deliberate effort to bury both her voice and her message. In exile, McGowan transformed. She left Hollywood behind, moving to Europe and turning her pain into art, writing, and advocacy. Her interviews became quieter, calmer, but sharper than ever, a woman who had lost everything except the truth. Away from the spotlight, she found peace not in revenge, but in freedom from the system that once defined her. Rose McGowan's story is both sacrifice and victory. She lost her career but changed history. Hollywood may pretend not to see her now, but every woman who speaks out carries her echo. In a town built on fiction, she remains one of the few who ever dared to live by the truth. 13. Mel Gibson. Mel Gibson once stood at the very top of Hollywood's mountain. He wasn't just a movie star, he was a myth. With Braveheart, he became the warrior king of cinema, a director and actor whose power was absolute. Audiences trusted him. Studios worshipped him. For years, his name meant excellence, masculinity, and immortality. He was the rare artist who could make the world weep and cheer in the same frame. Then, in one night of rage, that empire collapsed. A series of audio recordings revealed a version of Gibson the public wasn't prepared to hear, angry, drunk, and filled with hate. Racist and anti-Semitic slurs echoed across headlines, turning admiration into disgust. In a city built on image, his reputation became radioactive. Agents fled, friends vanished, and studios erased him from every conversation. Hollywood didn't forgive it, disowned. The exile was long and merciless. For nearly a decade, Gibson's name existed only as a cautionary tale, a punchline for late-night hosts, a warning whispered in studio meetings. But he didn't disappear. He waited. He produced small projects, financed his own films, and refused to apologize into extinction. Every attempt to come back was met with skepticism until Hacksaw Ridge forced Hollywood to face its own hypocrisy. The film was brilliant, human, and undeniably Gibson. Awards followed, but acceptance did not. The Academy welcomed his work but not his presence. His redemption was conditional, tolerated, not celebrated. He had clawed his way back into the frame, but never again into the family. Mel Gibson's story is Shakespearean genius undone by ego, talent surviving in exile. He remains a man split in two, the artist whose vision changed cinema and the man whose words nearly destroyed him. In Hollywood's endless morality play, Gibson became both sinner and saint, proof that the line between legacy and scandal is always written in pencil. 12. Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey was once the beating heart of Hollywood's laughter, a living cartoon who could stretch his face into madness and still make it feel human. From The Mask to Liar Liar and The Truman Show, he wasn't just funny, he was profound. No one else could blend absurd comedy with aching vulnerability like he did. In the 1990s and early 2000s, he wasn't just a movie star, he was a cultural phenomenon. But the man behind the grin grew tired of pretending. After decades of playing characters that made others happy, Carrey began questioning what happiness really meant. His public appearances turned strange, philosophical, abstract, and sometimes unsettling. He spoke about ego, illusion, and the hollowness of fame. Audiences were confused. Hollywood was uncomfortable. The industry that once called him brilliant began calling him unstable. The roles dried up quietly. He took fewer scripts, gave fewer interviews, and turned toward painting and writing. For a time, he seemed to vanish, not fired, not cancelled, just gone. His transformation was spiritual, not scandalous, but that made it no less threatening to a business that thrives on distraction. Hollywood doesn't know what to do with people who stop performing. In his solitude, Carrey created some of his most striking work portraits of power, greed, and pain, splashed in color and chaos. He spoke openly about depression, about losing himself in fame, and about finding peace in stillness. When he returned briefly for Sonic the Hedgehog, audiences were reminded of his magic, but he seemed different, calmer, distant, as if acting was no longer a need but an echo. Jim Carrey's story isn't one of disgrace, it's one of awakening. He didn't lose Hollywood, he left it. In a world obsessed with illusion, he chose truth instead. And in doing so, he revealed the ultimate punchline. The only way to win in Hollywood is to stop playing its game. 11. Will Smith. For more than 3 decades, Will Smith was Hollywood's perfect success story. He had the charm, the discipline, and the rare gift of being loved by everyone. From the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air to Men in Black and King Richard, he built an image so clean, so bulletproof, that he seemed untouchable. He was the modern movie star family man, role model, and box office gold all rolled into one. Then came the slap. One night, one moment, one decision, on the biggest stage in entertainment, and the myth collapsed. At the 2022 Oscars, Smith walked on stage and struck comedian Chris Rock live before the world. The crowd froze, the internet ignited, and the industry panicked. In a single gesture, the man who symbolized control lost it completely. The shock wasn't just the act, it was who had done it. The fallout was immediate. The Academy banned him from attending the ceremony for 10 years, projects were paused, and studios retreated into corporate silence. Smith apologized publicly, tearfully, repeatedly, but Hollywood doesn't forgive in real time. Behind the scenes, executives whispered about unpredictability, about image damage, about risk. The same system that had built him now stepped back to protect itself. Away from the noise, Smith began the slow work of rebuilding. He disappeared for months, resurfacing in interviews with quiet reflection instead of bravado. He spoke about trauma, restraint, and ego, the language of a man confronting the parts of himself fame had hidden. When Emancipation released, critics saw flashes of the old brilliance, but the applause came with caution. The shadow still lingered. Will Smith's story is a tragedy of perfection undone by humanity. He didn't fall because he failed. He fell because he reminded the world that even the calmest face can hide storms. In the kingdom of image, a single act of emotion is enough to exile a king. 10. Kevin Spacey. Kevin Spacey was once the gold standard of acting, the kind of performer who could dominate a scene with a whisper. From The Usual Suspects to American Beauty and House of Cards, his mastery of subtle menace and quiet control made him one of Hollywood's most respected craftsmen. He didn't just play powerful men, he embodied power itself, calculating, magnetic, untouchable. For years, Spacey wasn't just part of Hollywood, he was its blueprint. Then, in the wake of the Me Too movement, everything imploded. Allegations of sexual misconduct surfaced, and the world turned against him overnight. The response was unlike anything Hollywood had seen before. Netflix severed ties, erasing him from House of Cards, and Ridley Scott replaced him in All the Money in the World, reshooting the entire film just weeks before release. Spacey didn't just lose roles, he lost his identity as an artist. He went from Oscar winner to outcast before a single trial had even begun. As the accusations multiplied, Hollywood moved swiftly to protect itself. Friends distanced themselves, collaborators rewrote history, and his name became taboo. The machine that had once celebrated his precision now dismantled him with the same efficiency. Courtrooms followed, some charges fell apart, others lingered, but it didn't matter. The narrative was complete. In Hollywood, innocence is irrelevant once the story sells. Spacey tried to return a strange YouTube monologue here, a quiet European film there, but the audience wasn't ready to look at him again. His brilliance had become inseparable from the darkness around it. Each attempt to reappear felt like a ghost haunting his own legend. Kevin Spacey's fall remains one of the most dramatic in entertainment history, a reminder of how thin the line is between admiration and annihilation. He once played villains for the camera, now he lives as one in the public imagination. And perhaps that's the cruelest twist of all, that the man who mastered manipulation on screen could never control the story off it. 9. Johnny Depp. For decades, Johnny Depp was Hollywood's most captivating paradox, a rebel wrapped in velvet, a movie star who despised fame. From Edward Scissorhands to Pirates of the Caribbean, he built a career on misfits and dreamers, characters who lived just outside reality. His face sold billions at the box office, yet he carried himself like a man allergic to the machine that made him rich. Depp wasn't just acting, he was living proof that strangeness could be beautiful. Then the fairy tale turned into a war. His marriage to Amber Heard, once photographed like a love story, descended into chaos and accusation. Allegations of violence, addiction, and emotional destruction became public property. The courtroom became a stage, and the world tuned in. Every tear, every text message, every glare between them became spectacle. Hollywood, ever cautious, stepped back, unwilling to stand beside a storm it couldn't control. The consequences were brutal. Disney cut ties with him, ending his run as Captain Jack Sparrow. Warner Brothers replaced him in Fantastic Beasts. Overnight, one of the most profitable stars on Earth became too controversial to employ. His name was no longer a brand, it was a risk. He didn't lose his audience, he lost the institutions that once depended on him. But Johnny Depp's story didn't end there. His fans, fiercely loyal, turned the internet into a battlefield, defending him with near-religious fervor. When the court ruled in his favor, it wasn't just a legal victory, it was a resurrection. Cannes welcomed him back with standing ovations, yet the look in his eyes said it all. The applause no longer meant safety. Johnny Depp remains a living contradiction, a man broken by the same world that once worshipped him. He exposed Hollywood's cruelty, its hunger for downfall, and its fear of nuance. His legacy is no longer about pirates or outcasts, it's about survival. In the end, Johnny Depp didn't need Hollywood to forgive him the audience already had. 8. Shia LaBeouf. Shia LaBeouf was born into the chaos that would later define him. From his early days on Even Stevens, audiences saw something raw in him, a spark that felt both brilliant and dangerous. By the time he headlined Transformers, he was the face of a new generation of action heroes, young, unpredictable, and impossibly real. Critics called him the future of Hollywood. Directors called him fearless. He wasn't manufactured, he was alive, unfiltered, and burning too bright. But the same electricity that made him magnetic began to consume him. Arrests, drunken outbursts, violent altercations, the headlines wrote themselves. Then came the abuse allegations, lawsuits, and confessions of addiction and rage. He wasn't just spiraling, he was unraveling in public, and Hollywood doesn't rescue its fallen. One by one, studios distanced themselves, agents dropped him, and the word uninsurable began to follow his name like a curse. Still, there was something tragic about his downfall because, unlike others, Shia seemed painfully aware of it. He turned his breakdowns into art, his shame into performance. He wore a paper bag on his head at premieres, declaring, "I am not famous anymore." He sat in galleries letting strangers confront him. To some, he was a pretentious mess. To others, he was an artist trying to bleed honestly in an industry built on fakery. Then, quietly, he began rebuilding. He found faith, sobriety, and discipline. His work in Honey Boy and Padre Pio showed a man stripped bare, unguarded, and haunted. He began to speak less, listen more, and search for forgiveness not from Hollywood, but from himself. It wasn't a comeback, it was survival. Shia LaBeouf's story captures the tragedy of authenticity in a place that rewards imitation. He never fit the mold, never played by the rules, and paid dearly for it. In a city obsessed with masks, he dared to take his off and discovered that the truth, in Hollywood, is the one thing you can't afford. 7. Cuba Gooding Jr. There was a time when Cuba Gooding Jr. was the heartbeat of Hollywood optimism, vibrant, funny, and full of warmth. His breakout in Jerry Maguire made him a household name, his "Show me the money" line echoing through pop culture like a victory chant. That moment earned him an Oscar and a permanent place in cinematic history. He wasn't just talented, he was magnetic. The kind of actor who made people believe in heroes again. But fame, once so generous, turned cruel. As the 2010s unfolded, the roles dried up and the headlines changed. Then came the accusations, one woman, then another, then dozens more alleging groping and misconduct in bars and public places. Overnight, the image of the smiling, high-energy underdog was replaced by something darker. In a town obsessed with appearances, Cuba's name became untouchable. The same media that once cheered him now chronicled his collapse. Hollywood moved swiftly, cutting ties without ceremony. Studios canceled deals, streaming services removed his projects, and journalists dissected every past interview for signs of hypocrisy. No one waited for verdicts or context. Perception had already decided his guilt. The actor who once embodied joy became a cautionary tale whispered in studio corridors. How quickly charm can curdle into suspicion. When the court cases finally resolved, the damage was irreversible. Cuba appeared occasionally in small projects, sometimes on stage, sometimes behind the camera, but the shine had faded. He spoke about rebuilding, about humility, about learning to live without applause. But there was sadness in his eyes, the quiet grief of someone who once had it all, and now existed only in memories. Cuba Gooding Jr.'s story is both tragic and inevitable. Hollywood loves redemption stories, but it rarely grants them to the fallen. He was the man who once shouted for the world to show him love, and in the end, found out that fame has no heart to give back. 6. Richard Gere. Richard Gere once embodied everything Hollywood adored: grace, poise, and that rare kind of charm that didn't have to be loud to be powerful. From an officer and a gentleman to Pretty Woman, he became the ultimate romantic icon, the man who could make vulnerability look heroic. His career wasn't just successful, it was timeless. Gere was the face of elegance, the kind of star who made every generation fall a little bit in love. But in a world where image is currency, conviction comes at a cost. At the height of his fame, Gere used his platform to speak out against China's treatment of Tibet and to defend the Dalai Lama, a stance that, decades later, still defines him more than any film. As Hollywood grew increasingly dependent on Chinese investment, his honesty became inconvenient. He hadn't broken any laws, hurt anyone, or fallen into scandal, but he had angered the wrong economy. The punishment came without warning and without headlines. Scripts stopped arriving, offers vanished, and studio executives, privately sympathetic, admitted their hands were tied. Gere didn't fit the new global business model. He wasn't blacklisted in the traditional sense. He was economically erased. His silence became the industry's way of keeping peace with power. In exile, he found a different kind of purpose. He turned to independent cinema, funding small projects and telling stories that reflected his values. Away from the red carpets, he became a humanitarian, using his influence for compassion instead of commerce. His performances in smaller films carried more truth than any blockbuster could offer, proving that his artistry never depended on Hollywood's approval. Richard Gere's story isn't one of scandal or disgrace, it's about integrity in an industry that rewards obedience. He lost roles, not respect, and in the long run, that may be the rarest kind of victory. In a world that sells morality, he chose to live it. 5. Ezra Miller. Ezra Miller was once seen as the embodiment of Hollywood's evolution, young, fluid, intelligent, and impossible to categorize. They had a kind of energy that felt both artistic and dangerous, like the spark of a new generation. With the perks of being a wallflower and the flash, Ezra became a symbol of progress, a star who refused to conform. Studios hailed them as the future, the perfect mix of talent and identity for a changing industry. But the same defiance that made Ezra fascinating also made them unpredictable. In the early 2020s, headlines began stacking up like dominoes: arrests, public meltdowns, strange encounters, and allegations that blurred the line between eccentricity and instability. What once seemed like mystery began to look like menace. The industry that had championed their individuality now saw a threat to its carefully curated image of tolerance and control. Warner Brothers faced the dilemma first. The Flash was already shot, a multi-million-dollar franchise now tethered to a star on the verge of collapse. Executives hesitated, fans argued, and the media waited for the next scandal. Hollywood doesn't like chaos it can't monetize, and Ezra's chaos had become unprofitable. Official statements grew vague, publicists vanished, and their name disappeared from promotions as if erased by design. Ezra withdrew from public life, issuing apologies and promising to seek help. But rehabilitation means little in a business built on perfection. They were no longer the bold visionary, just another cautionary headline. The industry that once called them groundbreaking now pretended they'd never existed. In the silence, Ezra became a ghost of the revolution Hollywood never truly wanted. Their story is the perfect irony, a symbol of freedom undone by its own flaws. Ezra Miller showed the world that Hollywood loves rebellion until it becomes real. They weren't destroyed by scandal alone, but by the system's fear of what they represented. Imperfection in a world built on performance. 4. James Woods. James Woods was never the kind of actor you could ignore. He didn't need charm or softness, he had presence. With razor-sharp intelligence and eyes that could slice through a scene, he became one of Hollywood's most respected character actors. From Casino to Salvador, Woods built a career on intensity and truth. He wasn't a matinee idol, he was a craftsman. Directors admired him, co-stars feared him, and audiences believed every word he said. But in a town that thrives on image, Woods' truth-telling eventually turned him into a pariah. As political tensions deepened across America, he spoke out bluntly, publicly, and without apology. His conservative views collided head-on with an industry dominated by liberal ideals. Tweets replaced interviews. Debates became digital battles. To many in power, he had crossed a line that wasn't written but well understood. The response wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. His agent dropped him. Casting offers stopped. Studio calls went unanswered. No official announcement ever declared him blacklisted, but his silence in the credits spoke louder than any press release. In Hollywood, exile rarely comes with a warning, it just happens. Quietly, efficiently, completely. Woods accepted the punishment with defiance. He retreated from Los Angeles, calling out what he saw as hypocrisy in an industry that preaches diversity but punishes dissent. Occasionally, he appeared in independent projects, his performances still sharp, his delivery still electric. Yet the larger stage, the one he once owned, had closed its curtain for good. James Woods' story is the quiet exile of a man who refused to bend. He didn't fall because of scandal or crime, but because of conviction. In a city that celebrates rebellion only when it's fashionable, he remained the wrong kind of rebel, the one who wouldn't change his lines to stay in the film. 3. Alec Baldwin. Alec Baldwin was built for the spotlight. His voice, his posture, his confidence, everything about him demanded attention. From Glengarry Glen Ross to 30 Rock, he could shift from ferocity to comedy with the precision of a craftsman. For decades, Baldwin represented the rare mix of Hollywood sophistication and Broadway grit. He wasn't just another actor, he was an institution, the kind of performer who carried authority even when the cameras stopped rolling. Then came the day that changed everything. On the set of Rust, a low-budget Western he was producing and starring in, a gun Baldwin was holding discharged, killing cinematographer Halyna Hutchins. The tragedy sent shockwaves across the world. Questions turned to blame, and blame turned to outrage. Baldwin insisted he never pulled the trigger, but the headlines didn't care. The story wasn't about fact, it was about shock, and Baldwin became its face. Hollywood's reaction was immediate and merciless. Lawsuits multiplied, productions paused, and studios distanced themselves. The same press that once celebrated his wit now replayed the accident in slow motion, day after day. The man who had once mocked presidents and ruled the stage now appeared haunted, crushed by the weight of a moment that could never be undone. He tried to keep working, but every project carried the ghost of rust. Interviews became tearful apologies, court appearances turned into public theater, and his confidence, once his greatest weapon began to crack. For a man who had built his career on control, losing control so completely became its own punishment. Alec Baldwin's story is a tragedy without villains, a reminder of how thin the line is between art and consequence. He didn't commit a crime of intent, but in Hollywood, perception is everything, and once the illusion breaks, there's no camera that can fix it. His name will forever carry the echo of a gunshot that ended more than one life. 2. Woody Allen. For decades, Woody Allen was Hollywood's intellectual conscience, a filmmaker who could turn anxiety into poetry, neurosis into charm. From Annie Hall to Manhattan, he built a legacy that stretched far beyond box office numbers. His dialogue became a language, his characters reflections of human doubt. He was not just a director, he was an era, and for years the industry bowed to his brilliance. Then, the culture shifted, and the past came back for him. Allegations of sexual abuse, long known but rarely discussed, resurfaced in a world newly unwilling to separate art from artist. Documentaries revisited old wounds, newspapers reignited old accusations, and soon his name, once synonymous with sophistication, became a moral minefield. The question wasn't whether Woody Allen was guilty, it was whether his genius still deserved space. Hollywood, ever pragmatic, made its choice. Distributors canceled contracts. Streaming platforms dropped his films. Actors who once thanked him on Oscar stages publicly denounced him. The silence wasn't legal. It was strategic, the kind of quiet distancing that keeps profits clean. One by one, the bridges burned without anyone admitting to lighting the match. Allen didn't fight. He retreated. Europe welcomed him when America would not. He continued to make films, smaller and quieter, for audiences that still cared about his art. But the glow was gone. The same voice that once defined sophistication now carried a shadow that no amount of wit could erase. Woody Allen's story is one of legacy and loss, a study in how quickly admiration curdles into unease. He spent a lifetime asking uncomfortable questions about love, guilt, and morality. In the end, those questions turned back on him. Hollywood didn't convict him in court, it convicted him in conscience, proving once again that genius is only sacred until it stops making money. 1. Charlie Sheen. Charlie Sheen once ruled television like no one else. His charisma was effortless, his timing lethal, and his smirk the kind that turned every line into a punchline. As the star of 2.5 Men, he became the highest-paid actor on TV and one of the most recognizable faces in the world. To millions, he wasn't just a performer. He was a living embodiment of success, rich, reckless, and untouchably cool. But the same chaos that made him fascinating eventually consumed him. Years of addiction, late-night tirades, and violent outbursts transformed Sheen from entertainer to spectacle. His feud with the show's creator, his manic interviews, and the bizarre slogans, "Tiger Blood," "Winning," made him a symbol of celebrity madness. What began as dark humor soon turned tragic. In 2011, Warner Brothers fired him, and Hollywood washed its hands of the man it had built into a myth. The fall was spectacular. Tabloids devoured every word he said, every relapse, every meltdown. His diagnosis of HIV added a cruel layer to the story once again. He was front-page news, but for all the wrong reasons. The networks that once cashed in on his charm now treated him like a cautionary tale. He had become the very thing he mocked a star, destroyed by his own excess. Yet beneath the wreckage, a quieter version of Sheen began to re-emerge. He sought treatment, reconnected with his family, and slowly rebuilt his life outside the camera's gaze. His humor turned reflective, his interviews humbler. For a man who had lived at the edge for decades, survival itself became a kind of redemption. Charlie Sheen's story is Hollywood's oldest myth, the rise, the chaos, the fall. But what makes it haunting is how much of it was celebrated while it was happening. He wasn't destroyed by fame, he was consumed by a system that profits from breakdowns as much as it does from blockbusters. In the end, Sheen stands not just as a warning, but as a mirror showing what happens when a man becomes the performance he can no longer control. Hollywood doesn't destroy its stars with fury, it destroys them with silence. One day your face lights up billboards, your name opens doors, and the world calls you a legend. Then, without warning, the machine turns, and everything you built becomes someone else's cautionary tale. The cameras don't stop rolling when you fall, they just point somewhere else. The 20 names you've just heard aren't accidents. They're reminders of how the system protects its image while feeding on those who built it. Some were guilty, others defiant, and a few simply inconvenient. But in Hollywood, the reason never matters, only the narrative. When you no longer fit the story, you're cut from the script. Behind the lights, it's not talent that keeps you alive, it's obedience. The moment you question the illusion, the audience stops clapping, and the silence becomes your sentence. Fame promises eternity, but all it really offers is a countdown to erasure. And yet, there's something strangely beautiful about those who fell. Their stories reveal the truth. The industry tries to hide that the people behind the perfection are human, flawed, wounded, unfiltered. The kind of truth Hollywood fears most. Because in the end, the blacklist isn't about punishment, it's about control. And those who refuse to obey don't just lose their careers, they expose the system that created them.